There are doors the mind does not build to keep darkness out. They are built to keep one unbearable truth from returning all at once. In the near future, when grief could be managed by subscription and memories softened with medical courtesy, Elise Harrow began dreaming of a place no architect had built and no physician would have admitted existed. It came to her first as atmosphere, then as structure, and at last as inevitability. A basement. Not beneath her building in any ordinary material sense, but beneath her life. Beneath the version of herself that had been returned to the world, polished, functional, and almost convincing even to its owner. The air in that basement was always cold enough to feel unfinished. The walls were stone, though never the same stone twice. On some nights they sweated with black damp. On others they stood pale and flaking like old bone. There were no windows. There was no visible source of air, and yet the room breathed. That was the first thing that truly frightened her. Not that it was empty, but that it felt inhabited before anything in it could be named. At the far wall stood a door. It never changed. Wood swollen by age and weather. Iron latch dark with corrosion. No handle on her side. Beneath it, a thin line of unwavering light, too steady to belong to accident, and too faint to call hope. Everything else in the basement altered from dream to dream. Chairs appeared where none had stood before. A cracked mirror leaned against one wall, and on the next night had moved to another. A child's shoe, a gray coat, a rusted watch, a chipped mug with dried sediment at the bottom. Relics of a life Elise did not remember, and yet knew too intimately to dismiss. She was 38, employed in dispute mediation, and recovering, as everyone around her kept gently insisting, from a bridge accident in January. She remembered rain, broken glass, the cold violence of survival. What the clinic had given her instead of memory was explanation. Lucent continuity, where she had been treated, specialized in trauma partition. Their physicians spoke in tones so polished they almost deserved trust. Some experiences, they said, become too inflamed to leave intact. Lucent could isolate the destructive portions and return the patient to functional continuity. Elise had signed consent forms in a haze of painkillers and afterward resumed a life that looked, from the outside, impeccably her own. Then the basement began returning. At first, the dreams ended before she reached the door. She would descend no staircase because there was no staircase. She would simply become aware that she was already there, standing in cold stone air, watching the thin line of light beneath the far threshold, while something inside her, not curiosity, not courage, something darker and more intimate, strained toward it with terrible patience. She never touched the latch. Just before doing so, she would hear breathing on the other side, soft and steady, as if someone had been waiting long enough to learn endurance. Then she would wake. The dreams changed by degrees. One night she found a coat hanging from a nail in the wall, gray wool still damp as if from rain. Another night, a ring lay on the floor near the door, plain and worn, bearing a small scratch she could not place and could not stop looking at. On the fourth night, she found a photograph curled at the edges, its surface silvered by age. The faces were blurred or perhaps withheld. What remained clear was only the impression of having once loved what it showed. Then the relics began entering the day. The ring appeared on her bedside table one morning. She was certain she had never owned it. The gray coat hung in her wardrobe 2 days later, though she had no memory of buying it, touching it, or seeing it in any shop. Once she stepped barefoot into her kitchen before dawn and found damp earth on the tile in the shape of partial footprints that ended near the sink, as if whoever had entered had simply ceased requiring a body there. These things were small enough to explain individually and terrible enough to become impossible collectively. She returned to Lucent. The physician who received her listened with the careful compassion of men accustomed to billing for gentleness. He spoke of post-partition stress, symbolic recurrence, somatic bleed-through, the mind's tendency to create dream architectures around unresolved material. None of it, he assured her, meant anything had entered her life. It meant only that what had been safely isolated was seeking metaphor. Then, too casually, he asked whether the door in the dream remained closed. Elise said nothing for several seconds. She had not mentioned a door. His expression did not change. That was worse than surprise. He corrected himself with practiced ease, saying he had only meant whether the recurring structure remained inaccessible. But the room had already altered for her.
Clinical language, once merely smooth, now felt arranged. She left with pamphlets, a sedative refill, and the first clean certainty that the people who had restored her to herself knew exactly what she had not been returned with. That night, the basement had changed again. It was narrower, the air more suffocating. The walls leaned at angles no sane building should hold. The relics had multiplied and were now arranged with a kind of terrible intention. The gray coat folded over a chair, the broken watch ticking though it had no hands, a wine-stained napkin, a car key fob with water clouded beneath its casing. On the wall near the far door, scratches had appeared in the stone as though someone had once tried to count time there and lost the will to do so cleanly. And for the first time, she saw him. He stood near the far wall, not in front of the door, but slightly to one side, as though he belonged to the room and did not need to perform ownership of it. His face was indistinct at first, not blurred exactly, but incomplete, like a memory emerging through water. He did not advance, he did not threaten. He looked at her with the exhausted gravity of someone who had ceased hoping to be recognized and was nonetheless still waiting for it to happen. On the next night, he spoke her name, not in alarm, not in command, in recognition. Elise woke with tears on her face and no name on her lips except the knowledge that she had once answered to him in a life that now stood outside her like a locked room. From then on, he was always there, sometimes halfway across the basement, sometimes already close enough that she could feel not warmth, but the absence of it where a human body should have altered the air. He never told her to open the door. He never reached for the latch himself. He only said, very quietly, that she already knew what waited behind it. She began avoiding sleep, but bodies, like truth, have their own timing. The overlap between dream and waking worsened. The smell of wet concrete followed her into elevators. She found water beating on the inside of her apartment windows, though the heating remained constant. One evening, while washing a glass at the sink,
She looked down and saw the water in the basin darken, not with dirt, but with the shifting dimness of a reflection from a room that was not her kitchen. She blinked, and the image was gone. Another night she woke to the sound of metal moving softly and found herself standing barefoot in the hallway of her own apartment, hand extended toward a wall that was not there in waking life, but had been in the basement dream. Then came the sentence. She returned from work one evening to find the bathroom mirror misted, though no one had showered. Across the fogged glass, written by a fingertip that had pressed hard enough to leave tracks in the condensation, were 6 words. "You left him behind the door." She wiped them away with shaking hands. They did not reappear. They no longer needed to. By now, the basement had become less a dream than an appointment. On the night that finally altered everything, the space was larger than before and far more unstable. The walls seemed to breathe in slow contractions. The relics changed if she looked at them twice. The photograph by the wall now showed the edge of a steering wheel. The coat smelled unmistakably of rain. The watch, still handless, made the dry ticking sound of something timing not hours, but readiness. The thin line of light beneath the door had brightened. The room itself seemed to know it had waited long enough. He stood beside her. For the first time, she saw his face fully, and recognition struck not as revelation, but as collapse. Jonah. Not the abstraction of a husband she had once been told she lost, not the administrative label in a clinic file. Jonah, as memory had denied and love had kept in some buried chamber nonetheless. The line of his mouth when restraining fear to protect someone else from it. The patient tiredness in his eyes. The rain-dark coat she had touched 100 ordinary evenings without knowing that ordinary touch would one day become holy by absence. He did not accuse her. That was what undid her. He only said that she had left him there. Elise shook her head at once, not because she disbelieved him, but because some last defense still required its gestures. She said she did not remember. He answered that forgetting had been the treatment. She asked what the door was. He said it was not a prison. It was the place where the part of her loosened could not return to daylight, had gone on waiting until she was strong enough, or desperate enough, to come for it. Then the basement began to contract. Jonah stepped away from it, not to surrender passage, to acknowledge that it had never been his to open. The hunger rose in her again, not curiosity, not even fear, something deeper and more painful, the terrible longing to stop being half alive in the place where grief had been removed and called healing. She touched the latch. It was cold enough to feel final. The door opened. There was no second room. There was rain, bridge rail, black water, glass bursting inward, metal twisted under impact, the scream of a structure failing faster than the mind can form prayer. And within it, not a series of images, but position. She was there again inside the car, seatbelt half cut, lungs burning, one side of the vehicle already sinking under freezing water. Jonah's hand was in hers. He was trapped, not theatrically pinned, not held by some villainous mechanism simple enough to hate, held by impact, angle, panic, and time. The door on her side had broken free enough to open. His had not. The river was climbing. The world had narrowed to cold, pressure, and choice. He was telling her to go. She was saying no. He was trying to force calm into his voice and failing. She was pulling. He was slipping. The truth, when it came, was not the melodramatic one she had feared and the clinic had hidden for her comfort. She had not looked at him and chosen life with cruelty. She had chosen instinct. The body's old, frightened sovereignty had prevailed. She had kicked free, surfaced, and lived while he remained below, calling her name into black water no ear should have had to remember clearly. The basement had not kept this memory because she was guilty of monstrous selfishness. It had kept it because she could not live with the far more human horror. That survival had not made her noble enough to die with him, and grief afterward had not given her any language by which to forgive herself for being merely mortal in the moment that mattered most. The memory continued beyond the drowning. That, too, Lucent had taken. Hospital light, their voices, consent forms. The suggestion, so polished it might almost have been tenderness, that the mind need not be made to endure what it had no ethical architecture strong enough to carry. Partition, relief, continuity, a calmer life, an imposed survival arranged through amputation. When Elise came back into herself, she was on her apartment floor, weeping without restraint or dignity, her hands clutching the gray coat against her as if cloth could still answer. The basement was gone. Not vanished exactly, but completed. The air in the room no longer strained. The walls stood still. Something in her had ceased defending itself against knowledge. Jonah stood in the doorway. He was not a ghost in any simple sense, not a revenant, not a punishment. He was presence at the far edge of the regained truth, the shape memory takes when love has been denied burial and finally receives it. She reached toward him. He did not step forward, and she understood that this was mercy of a harder kind than consolation. He had not come to free her from sorrow. He had come to return her to it honestly. The next day, Lucent called. They used words like review, irregularity, destabilization, reintegration event. They told her that what had returned might be intolerable if left untreated. They offered a revision, a softer arrangement, a more sustainable life. Elise listened. Then she declined. Her voice shook. Her breathing did not steady. She wept after ending the call and did not mistake the weeping for failure. Weeks later, she still woke some nights with the sensation of cold water in her throat. She still stood at times in the kitchen, unable to move because a trivial object had become a relic without warning. She still spoke Jonah's name aloud into empty rooms and received no answer anyone else would have recognized. But the life that followed, though crueler than the one Lucent had preserved for her, was also finally her own. Not peaceful, not repaired, stronger in the only way that mattered, by no longer requiring false silence to remain standing. For the cruelest lie ever offered to the grieving is that pain removed becomes pain resolved. It does not. What is cut away for comfort does not disappear. It waits in the dark chamber beneath the life that has been returned to us, gathering shape, breath, and patience, until the soul is forced at last to open what it once agreed to have sealed. And if there is salvation after such terror, perhaps it lies not in escaping the unbearable, but in surviving it truthfully enough to begin again beneath the light beyond shadow.